Hello and welcome to Alan's Ancestors. In this video we'll be doing a case study of my grandfather who, as you would have found out from one of the early videos, he died in Taunton in 1924. I went to Taunton to look for his gravestone and couldn't see one. The cemetery was now a field. A few gravestones here and there, so I didn't know what sort of send-off he would have had, if he just had a pauper's grave, why didn't his family pay for it. And you'll see from the aspect of putting blossoms on your tree, in this case looking at newspapers, I found out he had quite the send-off. This is somebody I don't know, but look at this. It's a great monument to a sailor, an American sailor who died in 1867. And as my grandfather was a sailor, it kind of tied in. All right.
Let's start this case study with what we know. And if we remember back to the first video, getting started, I used my father's birth certificate to get a marriage certificate of my grandparents. And using that, we can look at it and see when a possible year of birth was. Frederick Joseph was 26 in 1920, which says that he was probably born in 1893 or 1894. So we can look that up using freebmd and also the GRO government website where we can get certificates. Let's put some parameters in here. I'm going to use 1892 to 1894 and that should cover it. And there he is. There's only one, so that's a good indication that's him. We can use this index number here, Southampton 2C10, and to look it up on the GRO website. But I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to actually look for the certificate and the index on the GRO's website. I believe the freebmd website is an essential tool if you're not certain of what parameters to use, or if you're looking for somebody's death or birth, etc., that you've got no idea when they were born or when they died. That's a great way of finding out. But we can pinpoint it to a narrow time, and we've got the name and everything else. So we're just going to put those in the GRO now. It has brought up, there it is, Frederick Joseph Gange. And so from that, we can now get a digital image of the birth certificate. And you can go ahead and order that for £3. And here's one I did earlier, as they say. And yes, 1893, 24th of September, 1 Anglesey Terrace. And his father's Frederick Joseph Gange, his mother's Sarah Ann Gange, formerly Fent. And he was a merchant seaman. And there's the witness, is his mother, Sarah Ann Gange, of 1 Anglesey Terrace. And now the interesting thing, well, I found it very interesting when I first saw this document, is that I went to college in Southampton Technical College. There is the college, or it's now flats. And if I turn around now and show you this, there is a 1 Anglesey Terrace, the Chapel Arms, which used to be the Anglesey Tavern. When I was a student, it was called the Anglesey Tavern. And next to it, you can see there on the left-hand side, that is where the college refectory was. So I used to have tea breaks in there, having a Belgian bun and a cup of tea. And I never knew that's where my family were originally from. Now, what sort of world was Frederick born into? Well, Southampton at the time was quite a busy port. There was steamships going here, there and everywhere. And of course, this was heightened by the South African gold rush of the 1890s. And on a personal level, what was happening with the family he was being born into? Let's try and look for the family in the 1891 census. So we're going to start by looking for Frederick Gange, his father, who was born in 1857. We can see it says 3 results there. Let's have a look what they are. And it would appear it's 1871, 1921 and 1911, so not the year after. Now, it could be that there's a transcription error or something, so look, include name variants. That brings up 600, which is not very, very useful. Let's try and narrow it down by putting in Southampton. Right there. Let's put up 4 results. Advanced options, let's choose the 1891 census. And no results found. Now there is a very good reason for that. As it sort of said on Frederick Joseph's birth certificate, Frederick Joseph Sr. was in the Merchant Navy. And in the 1891 census, it was on the 5th of April, we can see from this list of ships that he was on that I compiled, he was out to sea on a ship called the Nubian. So we'll now have to look for Sarah Ann and see if she comes up. So let's put in here Sarah Gange, Sarah Ann Gange. Her date of birth was 1867. And we can see there are no results found. That's for Southampton in 1891. So let's see if... Oh, there's a name variance. Now, if you're like me and you have a name that could be mispronounced or misheard, then you can bet your bottom dollar that happened to your ancestors as well, or a transcriber of the modern day might put in there what they think it should be. So I'm going to put in there Gage. Change the N for a U, and let's see what happens. There's 1 result. This is her. And let's look at the transcription. And we can see that they are living in Nelson Street, and there are 2 daughters. So we have Sarah E. and Harriet R. So let's look at the original record. We can see that it is Gange, not Gage. So that's good. And let's make sure they're the actual daughters of people that we know. So Sarah E. was born to Frederick Joseph Gange and Sarah Ann Gange, formerly Fent, so that's correct. And it's the same parents here, so we know that's correct as well. So these are definitely the right people. And if we look at Nelson Street, it's just around the corner from Anglesey Terrace. So that's the life he was born into. What happened next? Let's have a look at the 1901 census, see if we can find that. This time when we look for Sarah Ann Gange in 1901, we actually get the result. And let's have a look at that. And we can see that we now have another daughter and a son. If we look at, show 1 more row, Andrew B. Gange. And they're living at 45 Highlands Terrace in Shoaling. That's on the other side of the River Itchen. Nowadays you could just cross over the Itchen Bridge to get there, but in those days you would have to get the chain ferry to get from one side to the other. Now, although Nellie was born in 1897 in Anglesey Terrace, the same place that Frederick Joseph was, Andrew Bernard was born in Carlton Place, which is a totally different area. And as he was born in 1900, it would appear that they moved from Anglesey Terrace to Carlton Place and then over to Highlands Terrace. So next we're going to look for any educational records for Frederick Joseph Gange, if there are any. For this, we're going to go to Find My Past and go into the section that deals with education. And we can look under his name and in Southampton. And as we can see, that is the only result. So let's have a look at it. First, let's look at the transcription. And in there we can see the date of birth is correct, and also the schools, Woolston School. We look at the original record, we can see him at the top there. And we see there Frederick Joseph Gange, Frederick Joseph is his father. So it's 46 Highlands Terrace. I'm not sure why they made an error there. It's 45.
All the other records say 45s. And we can see that his previous school was St. Paul's. Now, I didn't know where that was, but luckily I have access to some Kelly's directories in my local library. And so I went there and had a look at the 1900 Kelly's directory for Southampton. And this is what I found. And in there we can see that St. Paul's was in Lower Bannister Street. That was the boys' school. Upper Bannister Street was the girls' school. And if we look at the map here, we can see right at the top left-hand corner is Carlton Place, where they lived at the time, and around the corner from it was the school, St. Paul's. So they did a lot of moving around. Something else you can have access to with Find My Past is the electoral register. So we're going to search for anything for Frederick Joseph Gange Sr. here and see what comes up. And there does seem to be quite a few results here. So we can go through them year by year and see when the family were at certain addresses and what times. It's a very interesting resource to look at. If you want to do a timeline of where they lived throughout the years, this would be a very useful resource. And of course, one question you might be asking is, why did they move so much? And the answer could be found if we go to newspapers.com and do a bit of digging around there. We can see the answer for that. It would appear that Frederick Joseph Gange got the license as a beer retailer for the Anglesey Tavern, what was the Royal Standard to start with, in 1893. And he then got one for the Royal Standard in Carlton Place in 1898. Why they moved from there to Highlands Terrace is something I've yet to find out. Maybe I'll never know, but it's certainly interesting. We can see here the original advert that would have been around for them to move to Highlands Terrace. Two unfurnished rooms to let, suit married couple, 45 Highlands Terrace. That is in the newspaper just before they moved there, so it's a good chance they answered that ad. We can also use newspapers to piece together bits of life, piece together what was reported, what adverts they may have answered, and here we have that Frederick Gange was the witness to George Barter of the Hanover Place, giving notice that he would not be responsible for any debt or debts contracted by his wife, Elizabeth Louisa Barter. Frederick James Gange of Anglesey Terrace, they're saying that they had a dog without a license, so we know they had a dog even if they didn't have a license for it. I wonder what they called it. And while they're still at the Anglesey Tavern, we can see that they wanted a girl to help them out with chores, etc. I wonder who she was. And then when they moved to Highlands Terrace, we can see they wanted to take on a bit more money by washing and also by labouring and doing all sorts of odd jobs around the Woolston area.
So far, we've been able to tell when the family moved from Nelson Street to Anglesey Terrace, and then from Anglesey Terrace to Carlton Place, by the newspaper articles saying about the licensing. What's less clear is when the family moved from Carlton Place to Highlands Terrace. So one thing you can do is look through as many Kelly's directories as you can and try and see if there's a date or a change in address. Now, there is a gap in all the Kelly's directories I have looked in, but on Southampton City Council's website, there is a local history and maritime digital archive, which does include street directories. So let's have a look at that now. So we're trying to find out between 1901, when they lived at Highlands Terrace, according to the census, and when the family moved to 2 Princess Street, which we looked at in a previous video, when the family moved there. What we're looking at now is the digitized version of the 1907 Kelly's directory, and if we go through the index and everything else here, we can see that Frederick Joseph Gange, Sr. that is, was living at 2 Princess Street. So at some point between 1901, when the census was taken, and 1907, they moved from Highlands Terrace back to the chapel area to Princess Street, which would remain Frederick Joseph Gange and Sarah Ann Gange's address for the remainder of their lives. So if we look at the 1911 census, we can see that the 3 eldest children had by then flown the nest. So where were they? By using the techniques we've talked about so far in the previous videos, I have found the marriage certificates for Sarah Elizabeth and Harriet Rosina, and they do show us that Sarah Elizabeth was married in 1906 and Harriet Rosina the year after, 1907. It's interesting to note that both marriages were in the register office and none of the Gange family were there to witness. Reasons for this will be talked about in a separate case study I'll be doing on Harriet Rosina. It would appear, though, that any differences between the family were made up with Sarah Elizabeth, now Green, because in the 1911 census, she is at the same address, so she would have been living with her husband and her son in separate quarters in the same house, and this would have been agreed, of course, by Frederick Joseph Gange Sr. But Frederick Joseph Gange Jr., my grandfather, the person we're looking at in this case study, as these next two documents show us, he joined the Navy in 1909 as a 16-year-old boy. We'll be looking at his naval career and all the records that you can find online and ship movements and all that sort of thing in the next video. So please join me then, and don't forget to like and subscribe.